Hey everyone, welcome to part 13 of the Man with No Name statue painting tutorial for Patreon. The last video I think was me lowering the hat, so resculpting and sanding down and changing the shape of the top of the head and the hat and all the rest of it. Everything got covered in dust, everything got ruined. I cleaned it all up, got rid of the dust, repainted the layers of base skin colour that I had, and the same for the hat. That's back where it was now, but just fitting better. So I'll bring the camera in, we'll get straight on with it, because this is a long series, because it's a full statue and it's a big statue, so it's going to be more videos than my usual series. So we will just get on with it, less talking, and we will carry on painting Clint Eastwood. I've got a load of reference photos from the films up on my screens. Let's get on with it. I will switch to... hang on, let me bring the camera in first. I sometimes forget which order I'm supposed to do that in, and I switch to the overhead camera and then swing it in, and it just makes everyone dizzy. Okay, let me just get rid of some of that kitchen roll. Let's bring my desk thing in. Okay, close-up camera. Whoa, where the hell is that? Oh, I know, it's because I had it zoomed in. Hang on a second. I had this zoomed in on my last video. I also had the focus in the wrong place. Alright, so there's the big overhead view. Let me get that in a little bit more. Actually, let's put me in the bottom corner. Hang on, 1, 2, 3. Hello. Right. So what I did on the last video, I had that desk camera zoomed in a little bit. So instead of showing the whole desk area like that, but things being quite small in the middle, I zoomed it in a bit. I mean, I could zoom it in quite a lot. And it basically lets you see a little bit more of what I'm doing. I think it might make it a slightly lower resolution. It's not too bad actually, because it's quite a high quality webcam. But if I maybe take it to about there, that lets you see everything. You can still see a decent size area on my desk, but this bit is just a bit larger in the frame, because it would have been a little thing like that, whereas now you can see quite a lot of it. So that's been cleaned up. You can still see the marks there where I sanded it down and repainted over it. That doesn't matter, because that's going to get firstly covered when we do all the multiple layers on this paint, but also that's going to get hidden in the neck, in the collar of the statue, sort of like that. So you won't see those bits anyway. They were just being smoothed down because they had like weird angular cuts on them. That's the hat that I did. Put the base coat back on. A couple of little bits that I afterwards sanded down because there was bumps on the casting. They will be nicely dealt with when we carry on painting. Now we've obviously removed the bit on the top of the head that's supposed to fit in there. It's fine. I will just fill that in with some epoxy putty or something, and we will glue the thing together after it's all been painted, so it will be one piece, and it will sit like that, and it will sit like that. I can tilt it up so you can see how much it's come down. It's a bit lower, and then once the hair has been painted, because it's going to be dark hair, there's going to be dark shadows painted under the rim, and obviously most of the time the light is going to be coming in from this direction, so it's going to be in shadow anyway, and that's going to look pretty damn perfect. Okay, so Clint Eastwood. Let me move the webcam settings out of the way and I can look at these pictures and decide what I think I need to do next. Okay, all right, I'm going to do my usual. Oh, hang on. First thing, I need some kitchen roll. Otherwise I can't dry my brushes. Right, take the lid off the thingy stuff. Flow enhancer. Wow, my brain is not working. Okay, so I'm going to do my usual dry brushing over the top to lighten it up, but he's not going to be as... He's going to be more tanned than other characters because he's Clint Eastwood living in the desert. But I still have to take him back to a main. So yeah, you can see the size difference between a 6th scale 12-inch figure head and this thing. Huge. But you can see the skin colour there. So that's the base colour. That's how that one started out too. That started out with that colour. And then we dry brushed it on top with a lighter colour to pick up the highlights, and then we started building on the layers. We're going to do the same here, but he's not going to be as pale. So what I'm going to do is do the same dry brushing, but my dry brushing colour is not going to be as pale as it normally is. Now give me one sec, I just want to have a look over here and see if I've got any pale flesh, which I have. I've been using cream because I ran out of pale flesh, which is fine, it works. I can get the same colours with it. It's almost the same colour. The flesh is slightly more yellow, but I was able to mix it in and get what I needed. But I had bought a load of different replacement paint colours, and I bought some extra ones, and I can't remember which ones I bought. So I was just having a look in the drawer over there, which is, I have 3 drawers that keep in my supplies for various things. I have a drawer that's just all sculpting tools and stuff. I have a drawer that is all drawing material, so pencil sets, pads, erasers, charcoal pencils, stuff like that for if I just want to do some sketches. And I have a drawer full of paint pots and stuff like that. So we've got pale flesh now for the first time in ages, because I've just been using the cream one for forever, because I thought, well, you know what, it works. Why do I need to look? But I just thought about it and I thought, okay, let's have a look. Let's see if I've got it. So that's the skin colour. It's actually quite difficult to figure out his actual skin colour, because when you look at all the pictures from the films, they're usually kind of in direct sunlight, so there's loads of strong shadows and he's squinting, and sometimes it's indoors, sometimes it's outdoors, and so there's quite a lot of change. But I kind of know how I want to do it, so I just picked up one of my oldish, not too big, not too small brushes, putting quite a lot of paint down. That's the only thing with painting big statues, they use way more paint than the little heads do. So I'm just mixing this down. I don't want this, tell you what, let me do what I said I was going to do. Until I get myself a 3rd camera, I will try and let you see the colours that I'm doing. So I'm mixing this in. I don't want it to be as pale as it is with normal pale, you know, if I'm painting a city person or something, but it still has to be pale enough to work with. Little bit more than that, because there's going to be red tints put on. He's going to have sunburn put on there, and my usual brown leather brown wash over the whole top of it to give the colour. I think that probably going to be okay. So let me just show you. That's the flesh colour, difficult to show inside a pot. There you go. And that's the colour I have just mixed. Actually, there you go. Better show on the side of the bottle. So all I did was add some pale flesh to it. Now then, do I do it with this brush? Why not? Let's do it with this brush. So I'm going to rub off most of it, especially off the sides, because we don't want any of that. Because we don't want any, the way this is given like big streaks of paint as it all comes off, we don't want that on the thing. We just want it to be almost as if I'm airbrushing highlights over the top, but I'm doing it with the brush. So as I always do a little bit on my skin just to see if there's anything there. And you want to start light and then bring it in, because you can control it more. So there was quite a lot not on there then. I'm going to do it lightly over the highlight bits. Let's get some more. It's actually quite thin, that, and it could be more. But I'm doing this subtly because I want to build it up slowly and be able to control it. Now there's going to be more lighter stuff done on top of this because I will want some bits to be more highlighty. It's not really a word, but it is now. So I will want some more highlighty bits, but only under control. For now, these bits are going to be fine because they will help me work towards the colour of skin tone that he has been in the desert. Now, when you're doing this, or when I do this, I sort of work towards two different goals. One is picking up highlights of things where if the sun was coming down and hitting, you know, like the eyebrows, the tip of the nose, the cheeks, things that we want to pick out but leave the darker colour in the shadows and in the crevices. So we do that. That instantly gives it a nice 3D feel. But also I'm going by what areas would be more pale on the actual person, or what areas are more pale on the actual person. And sometimes you get these parts of the ears are a bit more pale. Quite often when there's normal stubble, he's got quite a beard here, so it's a bit different, but down here is normally a bit more pale because it's sort of hidden by stubble, so the skin isn't as dark. You get the bits down the sides of the noses are quite pale, and round the eyes, because either people wear sunglasses or they just squint and their eyebrows block a lot of it, so that whole area there usually more pale and sort of goes across the whole thing. And so from in here, out here, and then across the side. Now we go in anyway and paint shadows under here, so we do change the colours, but if you have that as a base, it works well, because then you can decide which bits you want to bring out and be highlighty, and which bits you want to be shadowy, and you get to control it as you do it. So I'm just doing the same thing. I'm getting some paint on the brush, enough to cover the brush, so it's not just on like 3 bristles. I'm getting it on the whole brush, but then I'm wiping it off again, and we go in and do bits that we think are going to be more pale. I've got to be careful around here to not break that cigar. just doing the same, picking up pale bits around the lips, underneath the lips. Done those bits on the side of the nose. Now we'll go in again and paint shadows and suntan bits, and we'll do all of those colours. But for now we're just picking out the highlights. So there's a bit of variation on the skin. Now, often when we go into crevices, we paint shadows because we like to exaggerate things that are really there and they look better at a small scale. But sometimes you have two conflicting things that you have to do at the same time. So under here, under his ears, will be shadows. You can see we're getting a shadow with the light that's up there. So you get those shadows. So I will paint a bit of exaggeration of those shadows and do that with the paint effect. But also, if you look at anyone who's been out in the sun, behind the ears is also a bit often where it's quite pale in comparison, and I can see on some of his photos it is as well. So we're going to do that pale first, and then we'll go in and do the shadows as and when or how we think they should be. So I'm going to go in and do some pale bits up here, and then I'm going to take this down the back of the neck. I'm doing this quite roughly, just so we get some variation, and we're going to get all the detail when we do it. When we go in manually and sort of choose, okay, what bits do we want to be what colours. Oh, a bit too much paint on there, but that's okay, we'll fix that when we get to it. I should have sanded down. I've just noticed the back of the neck there, there's a seam line from the casting. I will fix that manually afterwards and repaint it to... When I say fix it manually, I don't mean do it with my hands, which obviously it's going to be. I mean, I will do it separately, away from all this painting stuff that we're doing, and then we'll go back and we'll carry on. Okay, so we're starting to pick out highlights here. Now what I want to do is I'm going to clean that brush off. Okay, so I'm going to get some more pale flash. I want to do some lighter ones again. I'm going to mix in some of that lighter colour that we had, but it's going to be lighter again. So that stuff compared to that stuff. See the difference? So I just want it to be a little bit lighter. Let's flip this around so we've got a clean bit at the top. See how much is on the brush. Wet fingers, which we don't want. Right, so I'm going to go in and do a little bit more on the peaks. Bit more around the eyes. Bit more on the nose, even though the nose is quite sun tanned. I often start off with sort of pale sides and build it up from there. Let's do some around there, around the corner of the mouth. That's going to be pale. Going to do some on the sides here and just take that up a little bit, up and down the sides. Let's do the same again. Get some on the brush, rub it off. Take it up the sides and then up the sides and down towards the stubble. Do a little bit extra on the ears, so I'm going to pick up the bottom of the ears a little bit. We're going to go over these again to, you know, finesse them. I'm going to take in a little bit extra in the corner there, a little bit extra in the corner there. Let's pick up some on the side of his neck where that muscle is that goes from your ear down to the bottom of your chin. We'll pick up that as a highlight. Let's pick up his Adam's apple, even though it's probably suntanned, but it's a nice sticking out detail, and anything that you can pick out in detail, just do those side muscle bits again, because this is going to have a whole layer across it anyway, so it's not going to look like this. And one thing I've got to remember, I would normally do them at the same time, but I will do these afterwards because this is quite a big piece, is his hands, because they've got to match. But we can paint them afterwards. I will look at the head and go, okay, how do we match them? So, because his beard is quite thick, I don't really need to lighten normally, like the stubble area, which I lighten before I put stubble on, because he's got quite a dark beard. It's quite a full beard. I mean, obviously it's not this, but he's got quite a full beard. It's not light stubble, put it that way. It's not 5 o'clock shadow, so you don't see too much of the skin underneath it anyway. So I will leave that as it is. In fact, what I will do a tiny bit just at the top of the stubble line, where you will see skin, where the stubble starts and then basically thickens down into a full beard, and we'll just blend that down. Let's have a look at the hat. Okay, now he looks really pale there, and he looks quite orange here, but that's fine. That's how I always start them. And what I do sometimes, if I've got a finished head, it can be useful to bring in. Now, this tenant is quite pale because in the show he's quite pale, but it can be useful to bring in if you've got one that you finished, that you know you're happy with and you know is the right shade and colour and everything that you want. It can be useful to look at something side by side and go, okay, what do we need to do before we continue? And you can do that. Now what I'm going to do while I'm here, before I carry on and start putting some brown layers on, I think I'm going to do, just looking at the pictures here, I think I'm going to do some more highlights, maybe a bit more pronounced. They're going to be painted over anyway, they're going to be painted on top of and had washes over them, and we'll be flicking colour on top of them and all kinds. But I do just want to bring out the highlights a bit more. Before we carry on. Oh, smudged a bit of water, a bit of paint on there. That's fine. Do a bit more on the side of the neck. Like I said, there's going to be lots of washes, lots of bringing out random colours, lots of bristle flicking techniques to get some detail on the skin. but to just get a good base where there are shadows and highlights, that'll do for that. Just comparing it to a thing off camera. In fact, why don't I compare it to a couple of things? Okay. Sorry, just realised you can't see any of that. I'm just comparing it to another Doctor Who one that I did, because I've done a few Doctor Who ones. I've been sent quite a few recently. And it can sometimes be hard to imagine, if you're painting a thing or if you're watching a thing being painted, how the early layers can translate to how something will look a little bit later on. But if you can, it will help a lot. And it's something that you get better at the more you do, because you get used to how things do look. I've just taken this light colour, but instead of doing a full dry brush, I've just added a bit of thinner to it, so it's not being completely just dry brushing over the top highlights. It's sort of getting into the sculpted detail of the skin a bit more, because sometimes when figures or statues have had a lot of detail sculpted into them, like maybe more of an exaggeration of what there would be, when you do things like dry brushing, it can dry brush over the top to such an extent that it starts looking fake. But you have to be careful if you apply wet paint, because then the light paint gets into the crevices which you want to be dark. So it's the opposite of what you want. But sometimes you have to do that a little bit and then go back afterwards with the dark colour to reapply the shadows after you've done the light light dry brushing, or in this case slightly wet brushing. I'm just bringing the light bits to be lighter still, and then when we go over with a thin wash of leather brown, I'll take it right back. So I'm just going to some more around that top edge of the stubble, where you can actually see the skin through the stubble before it turns into manly beard territory. A bit more the side of his ears there, a little bit more behind there, bringing a bit more down the side of his neck. Okay, that'll do for that for now. Let me put the colours, the lids back on the colours for now. Right, quickly clean this brush, because we don't really need to stop here, because that paint, even though it's not dry yet, it should be dry enough to go over with a thin wash, as long as I don't spend a lot of time rubbing the brush on there, because then it will rub the colours off and we don't want that. I'll have to get another piece of tissue in a bit. Okay, so dry my fingers, dry the brush. Because what can happen if you've just painted the thing recently, even if it's like this, dry to the touch, if you go over then with a wet brush, that's quite a thin wash, so it's mostly liquid, water or thinner, it doesn't matter, and you're going over, if you are rubbing the brush quite a lot on an area, it will lift the paint. If it hasn't had enough time to dry like properly, then you will lift the paint and you end up taking it right back to the first layer, and it's very frustrating when that happens, because I've had it happen a few times. It's a thing that you learn to be a bit more careful about. So either, if I want to do a wash a bit quicker than I would normally do, I make sure I'm doing it with a soft brush, and just sort of lightly apply it and don't stay in one place for any amount of time, and then that's fine. Or ideally, and making videos makes it a little bit more difficult because you end up trying to do things faster when you're doing it on video because you don't want there to be big gaps. Whereas when you're by yourself, you can just paint a thing, leave it to one side, go away. But if you're trying to do an hour-long video, you've got to keep doing something. So you can either change to a different part of the same project, or if you're just painting one head and there's not much you can do, maybe you can paint the hair layers, maybe you can get on with something else. But sometimes you want to do it all together, so I end up doing some of the other layers a little bit sooner than I would normally do. But I've learnt to be careful, and as long as I'm light-handed, which I try to be, they will be okay. Okay, so leather brown, that colour. Just putting some on here. Let's get a load of... Ooh, nearly knocked that over there. That was nearly a mess on my desk. A load of flow enhancer. Let's just grab a ton of water just to thin this right down. Thin, 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 thin. So you can see how liquid that is now. Really very thin paint. But that's what we want. So let me test it. Oh, that's still quite thick. I know what I should have done. Even though I thinned the paint down, there's probably still a load of paint on the actual brush, and I forgot to wipe that off. So what I'll do, while there's still water on that brush, I will go over and thin that down. And then we can go back into the thin paint. Oh no, it is actually thicker than I realised. Okay, right, it's going to be like that, is it? Okay, so applying the brown all over on one half, and I'm going to go in with a load of water because I didn't thin down the paint as much as I thought I did, and wipe off a load of the paint, thin it right down, but it's still going to have a brown tint to it. Now that's the basis of a suntan. So you can see the difference between that colour and that colour. I don't know if you can actually on camera. I can see it to the eye, and it's across the top there as well. That's more paley orange, that's a bit more brown. Anyway, let's get a little bit more on the brush. Okay, clean the brush, get a load of water on it. And wipe it all off. Except it's not all of it that comes off, which is exactly what you want. And then if there's any individual bits where you think, you know what, that could be a bit thinner again, get some more water, put it on, and just wipe it off, because it's better to do this. It's actually preferential to do this in multiple layers and build it up to what you want, rather than try and do it all in one go and it turns out wrong, and then you can't undo it and you have to repaint the whole thing. If you do it slowly in layers and control the whole thing, then you get exactly what you want. So doing the neck, round the back, I'm doing all this in one go instead of doing sides. Sorry, wasn't keeping that in front of the camera. So I've gone round that, clean the brush off, keep some water on it, and then just rub it off where we need it. Water again, thin it down. So ideally the brown paint that I watered down would have been more watered down, and I wouldn't have to do this extra bit with the wiping down with a wet brush afterwards. But we're getting exactly the same result. It's just it's taken 2 steps instead of 1 step. But with most things, when you're doing painting jobs, there are no mistakes. Well, there are mistakes, but there are no mistakes that you can't recover from. Even if you do something horrible, at the worst, you just have to paint the head again. You haven't broken it, you haven't ruined it, it hasn't been taken out of your possession and you don't have access to it anymore. It's just you've put on the wrong colour, and it's frustrating but not the end of the world. What is the end of the world is when you go to have a sip of coffee and you realise your mug is empty. Okay, fine, I won't have my coffee then. Okay, so let's start building up. I know what I did. I had this on a stick, didn't I, at first, before I started doing the sculpting work on it, which made it easier to hold because it was on a stick and I didn't have to be holding it. Now, thankfully, I can put my thumb in that bit and hold it like that, so it's it's okay, but it's a bit easier when stuff's just on a stick and you can hold it. Oh, excuse me, a bit sniffly. So let's start adding some colour. So we've got some deep red, this is called, and bright red, it's called. So let's start doing that. Because what we do now is we start to build up the layers that end up being realistic skin tone. But to start doing that, we start adding more colours. And even at first, you might be adding the colours thinking, oh, but I can't, this isn't going to get there. It's not going to do it. I don't know why it's not looking right. You will get there. You've just got to play with it. Sometimes you'll do a thing and it will take a big step in the right direction and you can see how it's going to end in the result that you want. And sometimes you're doing a thing and you can't tell if you're doing it right or not, or you think you're doing it right, but you're looking at the piece in front of you and you're thinking, it doesn't look like it's going to end up where it is. As long as you're observant and you're looking at the photos of the character you're painting or the actor you're painting, ideally the character, because different makeup, different surroundings, you want it to look like that person in that particular film. But also it's useful looking at photos of the actor, because then you often see more details of their skin that you can apply, freckles and molds and stuff like that, that you might not see on a film screen cap. As long as you're looking at that, or even just looking at other people's faces to see, well, how are shadows done around eyes? What colouring do people have around the eyeballs? What colouring do people have on the cheeks or the tip of their nose? If you're observant about all that stuff and slowly and carefully build up layers forward and back, aiming towards those things, you will get there and you'll end up with a really nice painted piece. So it's looking more drastic on the camera than it is to my eyes. To my eyes, it's, you know, there are pale bits and it's a bit dry brush on top. On the camera, it looks like he's a clown or something. It's not that drastic, but we're still coming in with colours on top. That there's lots of layers to go yet, basically. So let's pick up a different brush. Not that one. Where's my other? Oh, there you go. That one will do. So let's just, where can I show it? There you go. It's old, a bit worn out, but it's not a very big brush, but it's not a tiny brush, but it's good enough for doing details like cheeks and all of that kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is take, you know, that brown wash that we did over the whole thing. I'm going to take that colour and I'm going to apply some deep red to it. Just going to put some over here so I can control it a bit better. I'm going to get some deep red in there, I'm going to get a little bit of light red in there because I would like a hint of brighter colour. Okay, now what I want to do here, let's take that paint off, because that's what I did wrong before. Because even though you're thinning it down, there's still probably more paint on the actual brush from when you took it out of the pot. So what I want to do, I'm going to start applying colours to things like either shadowy areas, like under the eyes, areas that are just more red anyway, like the back of ears, the inside of ears, areas that are, so those areas are red because of natural blood flow. Some areas, especially on this character, are more red because he's been out in the sun and he's caught the sun. And we're going to add those bits to the nose and the cheeks and stuff like that, trying to follow a suntan pattern. So the folded bits, even though we'll be painting in shadow, the skin in those folded bits is lighter because it hasn't been exposed to the sun. And so we will be doing that. But what I want to do, what I was going to say before I completely forgot, is if I get some, actually I'll do it with the paint thinner instead of water. If I get some paint thinner and just apply some of that over the cheek, being careful to not rub the paint off, like what I said before. If I get some of that paint and I can go in and dab it around. Now we are randomly dabbing here. I'm not painting the whole thing in a big block. We want it to be a bit random and varied, but by doing it, by having the clear, whether it's water or thinner, on first, that just means that when you put some of this paint on, got too much there, get rid of most of that, because the surface is a bit wet, it naturally feathers the edges and it sort of blends it in a little bit better because the paint gets pulled into the liquid. But because there's not a load of liquid, what it means is that you'll put a blob of paint down. I mean, it's not even a blob, it's a tiny watered down thin bit of paint that you can't even see, but you put that down and that area just sort of seeps out but doesn't cover the whole thing, so you end up with a nice mottled effect that you are controlling where the paint goes. Now sometimes you might not want to do that. You might want to just apply it, you know, by hand on a particular area, like the nose. So I'm going in with that same colour, and doesn't matter if it doesn't look right at the start because it's one of many layers. I'm just going to get some water because that's gone a little bit heavy. It's actually not. Looking at the pictures, it's kind of exactly where it needs to be, but I don't want it to go on that thick yet. I want to build it up so I can control what I'm doing in conjunction with everything else. So I mix up that brown colour. Let's get rid of most of it on my hand. I like doing that on my hand versus on the palette just because it's against the skin colour and it lets me see how thin the paint is, and for me it's a good way of controlling it. So I'm just going to bring some down here on those bits of the cheeks because they're in the sun, and then make sure I blend some of that around. Now there's still some pale bits in there and they're slightly too pale, but that's fine because we're going to go over them with different colours and we are going to bring them up to exactly where they need to be. I will fix that little accidental smudge that I did with the lighter colour. I'll just match that in a bit with a tiny brush and I'll just get the paint exactly the same colour and we'll get rid of that. Okay, so these highlighty bits that we did, let me get some, in fact let's get some pure deep red, put some there. Difficult for you to see that probably. Let's see if I can show you where. So that, let's do a bit, there you go. So it's very watered down, probably going to be a little bit more. There you go. It is a little bit more. Very watered down, but slightly red. And what I'm doing with that, thin it right down on the brush so it's random bits. I'm just going to pick out a few bits, and as I always do, if your hands are clean, if you've just washed them, you can use your fingers to dab off paint in certain areas as a way of manually controlling how much paint is going on. But it's a thing that I've built up over the years and I've practiced over the years, and you have to have clean hands, because if you don't, the natural oils from your hands will spread to the thing you're painting, and then over time it will just get dirty and it ends up looking dark and smudgy and not very pleasant looking in the colours. Now, funnily enough, in the case of this, it's probably going to work quite well if that happened, because it will just make him look like he's a couple of days dirty from being out in the desert. But I want to do that myself. I don't want it to happen accidentally. So if your hands are clean, if you just wash them, you can dab on a bit of paint, and then if you think, oh, that was a little bit too much, or if you want to do it deliberately, you can put some on and then just use the tip of your finger and just go dab, 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 dab. And it's a good way of thinning the paint out, or controlling where the paint goes, or using it to mix the paint around. So even though these bits are highlighted, and we want those to be highlighted, I've taken that thin watery red colour and I'm blotching it around here so it goes into the crevices, and do what I did with my fingertips, because what that's going to do is keep those bits highlighted but change the colour slightly of the deep bits, and also change the colour slightly of the highlighted bits, which I want to do. So I'm going to do the same thing. Suntanned head would be more red around the forehead bits. Imagine if he's got his hat taken off now. He's wearing a hat now, so you won't really see this. But if you imagine you're in the desert and you're not wearing a hat, then right across here you're going to be very suntanned, very sunburned, slightly red. And he is, it's like a reddish brown. So I'm just going to randomly dab that around, let that settle down by itself. I'm going to put a little bit more of this red colour. We used the brown colour before on the cheeks, but I just want to put some red randomly on top of that, using the random shape of the brush to get different shaped things going on. This is supposed to be random and not look designed or hand painted or anything. Okay, let's get a bit more red. Bit more red right across the nose and right across the front. But it's so thin it's hard to see a difference. Let's have another peek. Still looks pale, but we're getting there now. In person it might look good on the recording. On my live preview it looked quite pale, like more dramatic than it's going to be. Also, it's going to look different when the eyebrows are on and the beard is on and the skin is finished. The skin is nowhere near finished yet, but it looks quite panda-like. That's a good way of saying it. On my live preview, I don't know if it looks like that on the actual recording. It looks much less like that in person, but we're going to build it to where we want. Right, so look at this. Just put some paint on, thicker than I would have otherwise done, but I knew what I was going to do. Take those thick blobs of paint that will look terrible if you left them, and with the tip of my finger, blob, 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 and it randomly mixes them around but still leaves it with a bit of shape. I'm going to do a similar thing here in the corner of the cheeks, and then I'm going to go in and just mix that around a bit. Corner of the cheeks up to the, you know, the corner that goes up to the eye. Now up under here is shadowed. It is pale skin because it's in the shadow, but we want painted artificial shadow under here, so you can start applying darker colours. Now sometimes I do it with purples, sometimes I do it with reds, sometimes it's browns, sometimes it's blues. Usually it's all of those, and that's what we're going to do here. Now as I'm looking at this, as I'm talking to you, I'm randomly sometimes looking at bits and even without talking, even without sort of deciding to do something, I'm just dabbing bits of colour on, because as I'm looking at it I can just see, okay, that colour would look good there, that colour would look good there. And the more you do it and the better you get, the quicker you can throw colours around, and more randomly as well. That's the important thing. It's got to look, it's a balance between it looking like a human head does, so there is structure and design to it, where the blood is, where the shadows are, where the sunburn is, where the pale bits are, all of that sort of stuff, where's the stubble, but it's got to look random within that, so it doesn't look like you've painted it deliberately to be a certain way. It's got to look like it's a thing that's just naturally, you know, through the process of growth has ended up looking a certain way. And what you will find is when you've got a few colours on the go, you might go, oh, a bit of purple there, oh, a bit of blue there, and you can just sort of dip in and out of the different colours and do that. And it still takes ages, especially if you're working on big pieces, or if you're working on complicated pieces. But you can be quicker in throwing the colours around, which helps you get to the stage of having the thing, you know, how you want it to look. Now I got sort of distracted there. I was going to mix some brown with some red. That's a bit too thick and I want it to be a bit more brown. Let's just try that. I just want to get some colour in between his lips. Not the final colour, not the final positioning, but I just want to get some colour between his lips. Let's just wipe off around the edges there, because it helps you decide how other things look. When the eyes are painted on, that helps you see how everything else sits. When the lips are painted on, that helps you see. So if you can just put on like a base quick hint of a colour, it lets you go, oh, okay, that's how that's going to look, so the thing next to it needs to look a certain way. And I'm doing the same thing again. I'm just taking whatever colour I happen to have on my brush or on the palette in front of me and dabbing that around instead of changing colours all the time. If I've got a colour and I think, okay, that colour might be useful in that place, using it while it's on the brush instead of having to come back and do it separately. I've got this nice sort of reddish colour. It's brown but it's red. That doesn't make sense, but you know what I mean. You've got a painter's mind, so you know what I mean when I say something is brown but it's red. So while I've got that on the brush, I am just randomly picking out areas where I think it'll be suntanned, or there'll be blood vessels underneath, or whatever. Dub, around there. Even though there's hardly any paint left on the brush now, we're getting some markings down, and we will go in with some more. In fact, let's do that now. Let's water that down even more, get rid of the rest of it. I've got to fix that seam on the back, so I won't paint the back, but what I will do is start painting some shadows under the back of his hair. Even though it's going to be pale skin, it's still got to have shadow on, so it's that weird thing of pale skin, but you've got to paint shadow onto it, so you've got to paint it dark even though you want it to look like it's actually light. And the shadows up there are going to be done with a different colour. I will add some umber in there, I will add some blue in there, I will add some purple in there. And when we start adding things like eyebrows and beards and stuff, that will all start to pick up. But already that's starting to look like a squinty, suntanned Clint Eastwood. Now it still looks pale against the hat. Don't forget the hat, not the final colour. That's just the base layer of very dark brown that I've put on there. That's going to have a ton of layers itself. But it's a good way of letting you see the shape of it. And if you imagine that in the traditional pose that everyone thinks of when they think of this character in those clothes, and when that's built up, and we've got all the layers on there, and we've got all the layers on there, and we've got the eyes and everything else is painted, and there's more to come on the skin, but it will look really, really good. And I'm going to make a base. I've got all the materials for it. Instead of just a flat black base, which it was going to be, once I realised that the base needed painting anyway, because the one that had been provided had clearly had a hole drilled in the wrong place and then filled in, so there were marks all over it. I thought, well, why not notch up the realism a bit and make it look like he is standing in the desert. So I went out and bought a bag of cat litter, which is brilliant for simulating small rocks. I'm going to be able to grind that down to make sand. I've got a bag of tiny stones, like little stone chips, from when I made the Dancing Groot figure, the electronic one. And we've got a load of paint, obviously. So we'll be able to make, and I'll do this on one of these lessons, we will do, and it's a thing that I've never done before. I know how to do it, but I've never done it before, so I'm actually quite excited to do this. We will mask off an area around the edges, so it's kept within a certain area. We will use some sculpting putty to just sculpt some shapes of the ground, because obviously the flat base is looking a bit artificial, so we'll make it look a bit natural. And we'll cover it with glue, and we'll put rocks down, and oh, that's what I did when I was coming home from the post office one time. I was looking at the ground. I looked crazy because people were looking at me, but I was looking at the ground, and anytime I saw an interesting looking stone on the pavement, I'd stop, pick it up, crouch down, look at it, go, no, not that one, oh, that one's good, and then put them in my pocket. And the whole way back I was just picking up stones, because we'll be able to use a couple of them to make the appearance of interesting looking rocks, and in this scale they'll look like big boulders. So you can get stuff anywhere to do things. It doesn't have to be all bought expensive from model shops. So all of that with the figure and his boots and his trousers that we've already done on these videos, looking all dusty but weathered and aged. It's going to look great standing on that base. So I'm going to stop this video for now, because it's coming up to an hour. I want another coffee because I've been talking a lot this morning and I'm getting a sore throat. So I'll make another coffee, and we'll come back. In fact, let me switch back to the main camera. Come on, computer's being slow. There you go. So we'll come back on the next one, part 14 I think it's going to be, and we'll do some more. We'll carry on a bit with the skin. We'll start building that up to get that looking more how we want it to be. We might put some base layers down, like the eyes maybe, or start to dry brush in some of the beard colouring. We're going to be doing individual hairs with brushes at some point, but we'll want it to look almost as if it's been airbrushed. We might do the hands. if we're waiting for something to dry, we can start adding the colours on this. So there's a lot to do, and we will come back in the next video and carry on. Like I said, it's a long series, this one, because there's more to paint on this than one of my normal heads, but it is going to be worth it. So I'm going to go. Take care, everyone. Have a good day. Look after yourselves. Look after everyone around you. And I'll see you in the next one. See ya.